We're now moving on to our third talk, and I am very pleased to introduce you to Associate Professor of Religion at Mercer University in the US, Leah Robinson. Now, Leah wrote this book, juggling, I really need more hands, but Bad Theology, it's called, Oppression in the Name of God. Thanks, Kristen. And I read this, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, and slightly blew my mind, because what she does in this book is makes us think about this word theology, and whether just because something's labeled theology, it must necessarily be either good or taken seriously. And she looks at some interesting cases in the past. Apartheid in South Africa, the Ku Klux Klan, all biblically based theologies supported them. We look back in hindsight and see that they were bad theology. And so this book is fascinating in analyzing that and helping us think about what are the red flags for seeing bad theology in our midst. One of them, surprise, surprise, is inequality. Anyway, that's enough from me. I just want to give you a quote before I hand over and welcome Leah. This is from Gustavo Gutierrez, the Peruvian priest and theologian who is considered the founder of liberation theology. And he says, if it's not liberating, it's not theology. Really delighted to have you with us today, Leah. Where are you joining us from?
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Amazing. I'm here in North Carolina, USA.
North Carolina. Great.
Indeed. So I'm on the East Coast. I'm a little bit earlier than you guys. Not quite had lunch yet, but got my coffee, so I'm doing good.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much for being with us here today. I'm going to hand over to you now. Let's give a warm welcome to Leah Robinson.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I feel really honored. This is not even scripted. The rest will be, but I genuinely do feel honored to be here at a conference that's so important. So thank you. I want to offer my sincere gratitude to Martine for inviting me to speak at such an important event. I'd also like to thank my fellow speakers for their insights and their wisdom on this topic. I grew up in the deep South of the United States. Take for that what you will. And I'm sad we're still having to have this conversation, if I'm quite honest. But I am grateful that we're here together and for the voices I've heard. So a little background on me, because my voice is maybe a little bit different from those you've heard today. I spent 11 years of my academic career. I was a professor at the University of Edinburgh and the University of Glasgow in Scotland. So I've spent most of my time in Scotland. And so it's lovely to finally be able to return to my second home in the UK. I got my PhD at Edinburgh University, and I'm also an ordained minister in the Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ here in the USA. I am a proud practical theologian by trade, and general nerd enthusiast in my downtime, even when I'm not doing this sort of stuff. I have a Scottish husband, and I still say y'all and wheelie bin with the same enthusiasm. So I guess you could say I'm a Brito Southern file by nature. I serve as Associate Professor of Religion at Mercer University, as has been said, and I live in beautiful North Carolina. It's very sunny here, and we don't like to brag, but it feels like in the USA we need something to brag about these days. So I'll brag about the sunshine. Just last month, I published my newest book, Bad Theology and COVID, with Paul Grave. And my newest book project is actually on conversion therapy in the USA, it being bad theology, I should say, needless to say. Finally, I should mention as well that much of the content of this paper is based on research that is in two of my most recent research projects: Bad Theology, Oppression in the Name of God, SCM Press, and Feminist Trauma Theologies, which is also with SCM Press. I have 3 cats and a dog named Zero. I'm also a Cancer, and that's the dating profile over. So let's get started. I have for many years been wrestling with the idea of naming theology that is oppressive or damaging as, quote, bad theology. I was scared to do that because it comes with so many debates about criteria and conclusions and definitions of bad and good, which are so subjective. So I put it in on the shelf for a while, but in the past few years, it has come down again. And more texts have come out that have also tackled this subject. For example, Peter Vardy's 2010 book titled Good and Bad Religion. In this text, he does not attempt to say religions are good or bad, but he does set criteria by which all religions are susceptible to acts of power grabbing, dominance, oppression, or even genocide or extreme violence. As Peter Vardy states in Good and Bad Religion, quote, to refuse to criticize evil in the name of loyalty is not a virtue. It is to be complicit in the evil, even if the evil is being carried out in the name of the religion to which one belongs. And so now in 2025, I'm going to start a conversation about bad theology in relation to women in ministry. I say start because this paper is not a 5-point thesis and conclusion. This paper is the start of a conversation that should result in debate and discussion. Some people will agree and others will not, whether they are from the Christian tradition or not. And that is absolutely the way that theology should be in its best form. This paper is also framed in sections. I'll first discuss my inspiration for writing about bad theology, and then I'll talk about the criteria that I've used to determine what is good and bad. Then I'll use examples from my life and the lives of other women who are very close to your aisles, I should say, to showcase bad theology in action when it comes to ordination. So part 1, inspiration. It's not a new idea that religion and violence are connected. At Edinburgh University, I taught a class called Religion, Violence, and Peace Building, which looks at how religion has influenced both practices of violence and peace. The perspective on religion and violence or peace building is viewed through a historical or a sociological lens typically. So when scholars speak of religion as violence or violent, it is from studying various instances in which those within a religion have acted in a way that reflects religiously motivated violence. The criteria for this violent type of violence is religious varies, but in general, there are connections between the violence and a sacred text or an interpretation of the text or a religious community or a leader. We've seen all of these sort of documentaries on Netflix, etc. In some ways, this is much easier than the current task at hand. One can actively see the connection between interpretations of certain texts and violent acts, or leadership in certain religious contexts, leading followers to commit terrible crimes. These events in history can be marked and examined. As opposed to exploring the connection between religion and violence in a way that is purely anthropological in nature, my new book and this paper looks at those events theologically. The assumption is that theology is God knowledge or God talk. And the presumption in this is that humans are somehow capable of attaining the knowledge of God. And I believe this to be painfully egotistical. Whilst theologians are actively looking for that God-inspired information on earth, the idea that we are somehow receiving a direct line of communication that is 100% accurate about the state of the world from the Almighty does not feel realistic. And if we are, then we are getting some serious contradictions in these dialogues. And this is seen clearly in historical theology. This makes the assumption that theology is a human activity, which this presenter deeply agrees with. Being a human activity means that theology is filtered through the wants, desires, and beliefs, among other things, of those who are interpreting. As a result, there can oftentimes be theological conclusions that look a lot like human desires, as opposed to something related to divinity. These desires can reflect the motivations of those who are interpreting, Accordingly, my question in this paper relates to these motivations and their consequences. What if the motivations of human interpretations are so overpowering that the practice of theology is used as a means of oppression as opposed to a divine desire for human flourishing? In the following section, I will talk about some criteria of bad theology, but there will inevitably be more that can be added or removed. All that to say, I do hope that I've opened the conversation up for this type of research to occur, as well as offer criteria by which further scholars can discuss good theology and bad theology on a global scale. So, part 2, some definitions and criteria. Catherine Tanner, a great theologian, believes that theology is ultimately God working in the world, but it still remains a human production. She writes, quote, "Theology is something human beings produce. Like all human activities, it is historically and socially conditioned. It cannot be understood in isolation from the rest of human sociocultural practices." That's end quote. As a result, culture can influence that which is produced on behalf of God. It can also create a system whereby theology that is created is self-justified by the community where it lives. While discussing the idea of how academic theology justifies its own practices as legitimate, Tanner believes that no one is immune to this type of self-justification, even you and I in this conference, which could lead us all to shrug and say, well, what's the point then? Well, Tanner suggests that we should never stop inquiring into our position and self-justification of theology, and that there must be reflection on areas of Christianity that seem to, quote, conflict, and that there must be a need for theologians to engage in, quote, theological investigation when it comes to reconciling certain aspects of Christian practice with one's Christian beliefs. Another theological friend of this paper, and I swear I won't go too deep into theology, but I have to because, whole academic thing, is Gordon Kaufman. In his text, The Theological Imagination, Kaufman states, "Theology is human work." Quote, "Theology is done by humans for human purposes. Theological work must be assessed by human standards, and its judges are themselves always ordinary human beings." End quote. How then do humans who are Christians know what is from God and what is not? Well, according to Kaufman, it's an impossible task. But there are always ways to analyze how much of theology is coming from a negative human construction as opposed to a positive one. It is through Tanner and Kaufman and several other authors that you can read about in Bad Theology, that's my plug, that I constructed a criteria, and it is as follows. Bad theology. So number 1, your theology is used to limit the flourishing of humans. Number 2, there is little or no self-reflection in your theology. Number 3, there is no desire within your theology to interact with those who are outside your own religious tradition. In fact, there is an us versus them mentality when it comes to those who don't believe as you do. 4, your theological understanding means that you are isolated from those around you, even those you may love or care about. 5, those who are a part of your tradition have little or no choice in beliefs or practices. 6, there is no desire for justice in the wider world in your theology unless that justice fits within an already existing belief system of your tradition. And 7, there is no desire for equality in the wider world unless that equality fits within your already existing beliefs systems of your tradition. I'm keenly aware that a great deal of the words used in these criteria could be defined in a variety of ways. I purposely not define them further because I believe it allows for a richer discussion about the different ways that ideas like justice and human flourishing, nebulous in the abstract, can look in a concrete and lived way. And this inevitably will look different in different scenarios. The key with this criteria is not to have the absolute right understanding of the words, but to offer you a lens to see the criteria being acted out in your own context, and then discussion, debate, and reevaluation. This is the purpose of practical theology. Now, is all this just bad theology because you don't believe in it? That seems a bit harsh, Leah. And this is the point. These bad theologies have consequences. And while you might blame denominations or churches in general terms, it is important to look at these people as specific bringers of theology. The leadership in these congregations need to be named, and their theological conclusions need to be debated. It's easy to make sweeping comments with little nuance, especially in relation to bad theology. But one of the key aspects of these exercises in looking at criteria and analyzing is to realize that there are as many theologies as members of a congregation, and each person must be held accountable for their own actions and theological beliefs that they teach others. The danger in this is obvious. The idea of a theological witch hunt is very real and very historical. But the task of a practical theologian is not to deem what is heretical and what is orthodox, thank goodness. We leave that to the denominational bodies and the systematic theologians. What it is our responsibility to do is to offer the tools to be able to see when theology has been produced or acted in such a way that has led to oppression. Oftentimes, this acknowledgement takes place many years after the oppression took place. But to have the knowledge that such events occur, and all in the name of theology, serves the practical theologian in their continued endeavors to create a more just world. So if we can learn to recognize a theology as potentially bad and openly name it and discuss it as such, then it's possible that we might be able to be a source of liberation in the world. Not just in regards to oppression, but in regards to theology itself. Now for some examples of this in the following case studies. Part 3, case studies. So in 2020, I began a project on feminist trauma theologies with my friends Katie Cross and Karen O'Donnell in Aberdeen, Scotland. Also where my husband's from, I should say. In my chapter for the collection, I retold a story I've told a million times. The story of the moment when I was 13, and I went in front of my Southern Baptist church and declared that I wanted to be a minister to the leadership. I was told, in no uncertain terms, that I was not allowed to do that. I was deeply confused by the whole situation. I'd grown up in that church. I'd had youth leaders tell me I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an astronaut. But for some reason that my brain could not wrap itself around, I could not be a minister, even though I felt that strong calling that I'm sure many of you have. The reasoning that the leadership gave me for not being able to be a minister was, well, women can't be ministers. God tells us so in the Bible. Invoking the Bible to a Southern Baptist is as powerful as a Southern grandma's stare when you're acting up in church. It is the law, the final say. I left that moment feeling as though I must have been very wrong. If God says no, then I must have not been feeling what I was feeling. Fast forward many years later, and I was encouraged to apply to seminary at Mercer University, a place that would become a haven for Baptists who tried to change things for the better. I was encouraged to get ordained. I was told I was smart enough. I was told the Bible didn't say what those men said it said. While it was lovely to hear, and I did get ordained, it almost felt like it was a wee bit too late. Not too late to act out my calling, mind you, but too late in terms of the traumatic memory of the original event to fade. Theological trauma is real. We see it in recent studies about the influence of ideas like hell on people, or through a wide variety of isms, as I call them, isms that are theologically justified in their nature. The Southern Baptist operated and continues to operate under a misogynistic theology that lends itself more to a system that they want to keep together for their own good, rather than a system that is biblically or theologically justified. They're doing bad theology, plain and simple. For example, their theology was definitely used to limit the flourishing of humans,